Hello everyone. Welcome to Azure Back to School online sessions and welcome to my session, Azure Networking Pressure Cooker. My name is Vladimir Stefanovic. I'm Microsoft Azure MVP and Microsoft Certified Trainer for a long time, as well as regional lead for MCTs in Serbia. I'm originally from Serbia, but currently live and work in Netherlands, in Amsterdam. Work as mission-critical engineer and cloud solution architect at Schubert Phyllis, and you can find my Twitter handle in the bottom of this screen. So if you think that I can answer to any of your Azure-related questions, don't hesitate to reach me. It would be nice to help you. The main agenda of this session is to discover what we have in Azure, services and resources which are network related. And definitely they are growing on a daily basis. If you take a look on 5 years ago, maybe 6, and if we work with Azure in that time, networking services were very limited. We had only virtual networks and services around it, but today situation is a bit different. So we will start with basic services, and definitely the number one is virtual network. 5-6 years ago we would be able to use virtual network only if we have infrastructure as a service workload. If we want to run application services, web apps, services like that, Azure SQL, maybe that will not be too helpful. Today, a quite different situation, and we can use virtual network for many services. But what is the virtual network in a nutshell? Virtual network is isolated portion of networking in Azure, which we will use to host our workload from the networking perspective. As I said already, situation today is a bit different, so we can involve a lot of services in virtual network and have private connectivity between services, but we will talk a little bit later about that. But let's talk from the perspective of 5 years ago. If we have a virtual network with one or more subnets for communication, separation, or similar things, what we need to have? We need to have network interface card, which will be connected to one of those subnets. And automatically, if we have a network interface card, for instance, assigned to the virtual machine, that network interface card will have private IP address. And in that case, we can say, okay, we have fully functional resource from the network perspective. We have network, one or more subnets. We have virtual machine with network interface card, one or more, and we have private IP address. But how we will access that resource? How that resource will be secured? Is there any helpful from that perspective? Yes, but we need to include a couple of more services. From the security perspective, basic security perspective, we need to have network security groups. Network security groups are access control lists that will be assigned to subnet or network interface card. That really depends what is your needs, but highly recommended is to assign a network security group on subnet level, and that's mean on the subnet level you will be able to control access to your resources using inbound and outbound access controllers, which is really important. By the way, if you use default deployment of virtual machine, for instance, and select that you want to have network security group on some level, and we want to have RDP or SSH access, by default that access will be open for all internet. which is not the best idea. So network security group, if it's configured in a proper way, will be first line of defense, because that access controllers can de facto block unexpected network traffic. But we still have no possibility to connect to specific workload in our virtual network, except we have some VPN tunnels or whatever, which will be explained a little bit later as well. What we need to have, we need to have public IP address, which will be assigned to network interface card. And in that case, public IP address will be fully matched to private IP address, and all traffic will be forwarded from public to private. So you will be able to use public IP address to connect to your resources from outside world. Of course, network security group will protect your workload, and you prevent access from specific IP addresses, let's say, specific areas or whatever. And in the end of the list of the basic core services, I put route tables. Route tables are not so usual in smaller environment, but in bigger environment, especially in enterprise organization, route tables are something that you can see every time. If you have a lot of virtual networks with a lot of subnets, and you have some kind of connectivity between them, some kind of routing, especially if you have external firewalls, network virtual appliances, firewalls or whatever, you need to have different routes. If you want to control and prevent specific outbound traffic, which is one of the most common scenarios, where you will place some firewall in hub network and then want to protect outbound traffic to the internet through that firewall, you need to have route tables and say, okay, as our default route will be specific IP address which is assigned to firewall. That scenario is one of the most common scenarios. And then we can say, yeah, we have a lot of core services, and most probably every workload in Azure will have maybe all of them, maybe majority of them. Now we can move to next level and see what I called as advanced core services. One of them is NAT gateway. A couple of years ago we had a situation in one project where we had a lot of services behind the load balancer with a couple of IP addresses, but we were not able to control outbound traffic from the context of outbound IP address. And at that moment, NAT gateway was not available as a service to use, and we had to find out some kind of workaround. A couple of months later, NAT gateway was announced and saved us for similar projects later, help us to have unique and consistent outbound IP address using NAT gateway. So that's mean if we have a ton of services in one virtual network and all of them need to have any kind of outbound access and at the same time we don't want to install and configure some firewall device or something like that, use route tables to route traffic. At that moment we need to have some pretty basic stuff. And yes, NAT gateway was quite helpful. You will deploy one public IP address assigned to subnet as a NAT gateway, and from that moment all virtual machines, all resources assigned to that subnet that need to be routed through that subnet and virtual network to reach internet or other networks will outside of your tenant and Azure especially will go out from that IP address. So that's mean if you need to whitelist your outbound public IP for the third-party services, you will have only one. And that was really, really helpful at that moment. So, second service on my advanced core services list is DNS, which is really, really important. And for the first time, we were able to host public DNS zones in Azure if we need to have our zones. But a little bit later, private DNS zones were announced, and that is more important, especially if you want to use private endpoints and private links for communication between resources using private addresses. Then it's really important to have private DNS zones with specific names, which need to be unique, of course, and different kind of configuration. And that is really important if we want to deploy private endpoints and private links. And then we have a new question. What is the private link and private endpoints? As I said in the beginning of this session, 5-6 years ago, we were able to use virtual networks for the virtual machine loads, virtual machine scale set loads, workloads at that moment. But today, you can integrate your app service. You can integrate your Azure SQL databases, your AKS workload directly to the private network. You can ingest your platform as a service workload in our private network. And that is really good option, especially in the bigger organization where you have hybrid connectivity between maybe your data center, headquarters, whatever, and you want to have secure resources on the other side. For instance, you can deploy web applications using web app and app services, ingest them to the virtual network, then have connectivity between that virtual network and your on-prem network, and you will be able to read those resources or SQL databases, of course, MySQL databases using private IP addresses. You will not go outside of your organizational network to reach internet, go through the internet on the public endpoint. No, you will go through the VPN tunnel on express route directly to the private address of your platform as a service. Before we had that option, we had to use service endpoints for secure communication between Azure resources. For instance, virtual networks will have 2 or more subnets. One will be assigned to application services, other one will be used for different workloads, whatever. And then we'll, for instance, on the SQL side, said, yeah, we want to have service endpoint for the app service, and that virtual network, so that means that subnet will be able to access. At the end of the day, you will still use public endpoint between those services for communication, but that will be done through Azure backbone. Your communication will not occur through the internet. That will be done through the Azure backbone network. But today we have private link, which is pretty popular service today that we can use. And a couple of weeks ago, network security group and user-defined routes are finally generally available for use for the private links. That was one pretty big blocker for the big organization for the last couple of years, where private links were not able to have any kind of control. So that's mean if you have private link, private endpoint, and want to protect using network security group or have user-defined routes, that was not possible. Hopefully that's possible today, and we have now any kind of issue with those kind of configuration today. And if they look in basic and advanced core services, the most of them are here. Maybe I missed something, that is possible, of course. But I think that now we have one broad picture what we can do and how we can configure our network for different kind of workloads. Before we start to designing some stuff, we need to have all of those services in mind and think about how we will implement and put them in production. So, next logical step after we completed virtual networking and surrounding services story is definitely load balancing. And there are a lot of load balancing services in Azure which we can use, but found sometimes is really stressful for customers to choose specific service which they will use for their workloads. And also that depend on what is your workload, what kind of application you have, what are your needs, which kind of features you want. Is that the regional or not regional distributed application and similar things. And definitely we can start with traditional load balancer in Azure Load Balancer, which can be deployed as a private as well as the public. But that is layer 4. And for the most scenarios, we can use that service, but it will not be sufficient with the features which we'll have. But at the same time, internal load balancer with private IP addresses is service which is mandatory if you want to create any kind of cluster inside of Azure. For instance, file service cluster, Microsoft SQL always on, or similar type of cluster. That is important. And you cannot do that without internal load balancer. But if we talk about more complex application, mission critical application, I'm afraid that load balancer shouldn't be your first choice. Then we have application gateway. Application gateway is a load balancing service which will do load balancing on the layer 7 and most similar with most load balancer we know from the on-prem perspective, like Netscaler, Barracuda, or similar stuff. And we can use a lot of features. One of them is web application firewall, which we will mention a little bit later. And yeah, definitely, if you have application workload, the most probably you will use application gateway, or you will need to use application gateway based and due to its functionalities. If you have regional distributed workload, then we have a front door and the traffic manager, which works on different way, but can help us with regional workload. Front door especially, and then we can use application gateway behind in specific regions, front door in front, and have distributed traffic based on some filters. Also, we can use web application firewall policies and rules in the front door so we can protect globally our workload. And on the other side, there is a traffic manager, which we will have as a global distributed DNS balancing, which will, based on some rules that we can configure, distribute our traffic between different endpoints. Those endpoints could be in the same region or in different region, but at the first place, that could be used for the regional load balancing. And at the end of the list, we can use any of network virtual appliances, of course, which are supported in Azure for load balancing. Is that good or bad decision? Depends on so many circumstances around that. But yes, at the end of the day, you can use a lot of different network virtual appliances. So, if we take a look on Azure portal and wanted to deploy some of load balancing services, you can just type simply here load balancing. And once we do that, we will find out load balancing. Help me choose under services, which is de facto is not the service, but need to be placed somewhere. And if we click there, we can see what load balancing solutions are there. Of course, there is no any NVA because that is in a nutshell infrastructure as a service which we can run. And we're still not sure what we want to use, what is the best for our workload. The first thing is we have service comparison. And we can see what is possible to do with load balancing in Azure, what we can use. What are features presented in specific resources and services? We are still not sure, no problem. We will back to help me choose and answer a couple of questions. So let's see. Does your application use HTTP or HTTPS? No. So then we can use load balancer because it's layer 4, or we can use traffic manager. But those kind of scenarios are not so popular today, and the most common situation is yes, we have HTTPS needs for our application. That's mean we have application gateway, front door, traffic manager as a solutions, possible solutions, of course. Public internet facing, yes, we'll be deploying in multiple regions. No. So the recommended service will be application gateway. The most probably will be more than enough sufficient for majority of workloads. But let's say we need to have multiple regions, we need performance acceleration, we need SSL offloading. In that case, what we need to deploy front door as a global service for regional load balancing, and then we will have application gateway in each of regions, which will balancing traffic inside of that region with specific rules, SL offloading, specific policies, whatever. And yes, that is one of the best options to find out what you exactly need. This picture maybe represents the best what we can use. So that is a thing we already discussed. On the top of everything, we have front door or traffic manager. In this case, because traffic manager works differently than front door, you can see that front door will point to application gateway in regions, and traffic manager will point to blob stores for maybe some static data or something like that. If they click on each region, what we have, so then we have application gateway, we have virtual machine scale set in this picture, we have application service instance, which is behind the front door but could be behind application gateway, and also we have load balancer behind one of the server pools, which also pointed to virtual machines in this picture, but those machines are in database tier, so that's mean most probably that is SQL cluster, MySQL cluster, whatever, and we need to have some clustering feature that is not possible to use in a traditional way, so that's mean we need to use something a little bit different. Then next logical step again is a network security, and we already mentioned network security groups, which could be placed here as well, but I decided to put network security group in a basic thing because that is not any fancy network security service. That is this basic access control list, which we need to have, definitely. We need to have NSGs, and we will control some kind of traffic. But if we want to move our security to the next level, then we need to deploy one or more of those services. So firewall is one of the most popular today between organizations, and there's a big discussion. Do we need to use Azure Firewall? Is that enough? Because there are no so many features and configurations. Or we would like to use network virtual appliance as a firewall with more features, more functionalities. And there is no easy answer. At the first look, Azure Firewall doesn't have so many features, but possibility for integration with other network services, other security services, like Sentinel, like Network Watcher, and so many different, will create one big security network list of services, and you will be able to secure a network in a proper way. Also, you don't need to have acquired deep network knowledge for this one, because Microsoft Azure will manage a lot of those things. If we want to have DDoS protection, we can do that on the network level, but even though that service is one of the most expensive from the networking perspective, we can use DDoS protection plans, and then we can assign those protection plans to more than one network until we have below 100 services and resources protected by DDoS protection plan. Price will be the same. We already mentioned web application firewall a couple of times when we discussed application gateway and front door. And yes, web application firewall is security service which will be assigned to application gateway or front door. They have that capability, and then you can protect your application workload traffic more better. From the connection perspective to the virtual machines in your environment, regardless of that virtual machine are maybe jump host or direct services deployed, and if you don't want to have RDP open or something like that, then you can deploy Azure Bastion service. Azure Bastion service will provide us with functionality to connect to virtual machines directly through the Azure portal. And that will be fully protected. You don't need to open anything from the internet. There is no public IP address that you will use. There are a couple of ways how you can connect to Azure Bastion service and Azure Bastion virtual machines, but yes, that is secure. You can create something similar based on your own using VPNs, express routes, and so on, but at the end of the day, you need to manage the thing while Azure Bastion is managed by Microsoft. Of course, Network Watcher is here, and you can track a lot of things, a lot of logs, and especially if you enable all of those tracking, you can find in Network Watcher a lot of useful things that can clarify some things which are happening on network. And from security perspective, I would like to stay here because security will be a different topic, especially on network security, and there are a lot of things which we can use. But yes, those kinds of services are network related services which will help us to have better security. And in the end of this list, we will have hybrid networking, which is quite important today because hybrid is new buzzword, old new buzzword, and so many companies will stay in hybrid mode for a long time because they cannot rid of their data centers data, or there is some kind of regulation. You cannot move all of your data in cloud, all your workload, regardless of what is the main reason. you will use hybrid connectivity. And depends on what is your plan, how your organization is big. Do you have any growth plan or something like that? You definitely need to select one of those services or all of them in combination. So the basic service that we will use for connecting on-prem network with cloud environment is virtual network gateway, which will be placed inside of virtual network. And that is the most common situation in big organization as well, where we will create hub and spoke network, where one of those networks will be hub network with virtual network gateway connected to the on-prem, different clients, different locations, whatever. And then a spoke network will be able to communicate with hub network and leverage virtual network gateway that is placed in hub network. If your network is growing and number of services, traffic and so on is growing, you then need to think about using express route, which is direct connection between your data center and Azure data centers using fiber. That's a bit more expensive, of course, because you need to have Azure side, you need to have ISP from your side, which will have possibility to connect each other, and then you can use express route. But Virtual WAN can be used to combine all of those services and all of those logics in a hybrid networking, because Azure Virtual WAN is managed hub and spoke network. And that is something that is not, to be honest, so new service, but it's improving on a daily basis, and a lot of things will be improved more in terms of connectivity, communication, security, and so on. But today, we can see that so many companies, especially big organizations, already use Virtual WAN, because management of hub and spoke model will be reduced to minimum. And some of things which are not possible to do in traditional hub and spoke model will be possible easy in Virtual WAN. For instance, one of them is if you have virtual network gateway, you can have 30 VPN tunnels, and you cannot have 31, 32, 35. That is not possible. If you have Virtual WAN hub, and you can have and you have already implemented virtual network gateway inside of Virtual WAN, then you can have up to 1,000 site-to-site VPN tunnels, which is 30 times more. And for specific organization, yes, that could be game changer. I had one situation a couple of years ago where one of our clients had to implement more than 50 VPN site-to-site tunnels with its customers. And since that was not possible with virtual network gateway, we were in a problem, let's say, and had to deploy one of the NVAs. Solution is workable, that works, there is no any kind of issue, but we cannot use Azure services for that purpose at that moment. Right now that is much easier because there are a lot of possibilities using Virtual WAN. Virtual WAN need to have one Virtual WAN hub inside of the Virtual WAN, and then to one hub which can be unsecured without by default implemented Azure Firewall, or secured with Azure Firewall implemented directly into Virtual WAN hub, will be connected, or so many other virtual networks on-prem networks, branch locations, client locations will be connected to one hub. And then routing will be much easier. Of course, we can add a bit of complexity in that configuration by configuring different kind of route tables, where our route will be propagated, what routes I will read from the routing table, and so on. But by design, we don't need to spend so many time to configure Virtual WAN to have up and running configuration. Of course, if we have multi-region deployment and have the same thing on the other side in other region, less networks, for instance, as a secondary location, less clients, or maybe more, maybe the same. That really depends on what is the scenario and workload. Then we can connect hubs. Virtual WAN hubs can be connected between each other. So that means if we have one workload in the United States and other workload in Europe, then we can connect those hubs, and all routes will be propagated between those hubs. And without specific complexity and additional configuration, we will be able to reach from one location to other location without problems. And definitely that could be a game changer, especially for bigger organizations today, without needed deep networking knowledge to deploy all of those things on their own. So I hope that I clarified some things for you and give you an idea how you can discover networking services in Azure and how you can start using them in different scenarios. Of course, that was just a brief overview of all of those services, because if we want to go a little bit deeper, we need to spend more time, and most probably all of those sections we can spend a couple of hours for investigation to see what is possible, what functionalities we have. But I think for now you have enough information to start exploring networking services and start playing with them and configure some kind of infrastructure around them. So thank you very much for your attention, and enjoy in other Azure Back to School sessions.